chapter 5, starting in verse 1. So verse 1, the elders who are among you I exhort. I who am a fellow elder, a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. All right. The word elders, the elders who are among you. This is the word presbyteros, presbyters. This word can be used in regard to simple age issue, that is somebody who's a senior, or it can be a term of rank or office. And this term was used among the Christians as a designation for pastor. So the presbyters are the pastors, the elders are the pastors. Peter is writing this to, I'm not hooked up here, hang on. Forgot about it. Good.
So we were just thinking about focus.
All right, let's try this again. All right, so presbyteros is a reference to pastors. It's elders literally, but it was used by the Christians as a designation for pastors. So pastors who are among you. And remember, Peter is writing this to numerous congregations. He's writing this to a geographical area which would have a number of churches in it. So he's addressing all the pastors here. That's why it's in the plural. Not that these churches all had multiple pastors in them. First asterisk on the handout. Peter numbers himself, right, among these presbyters. I who am a fellow elder. I who am a fellow pastor. He is different from the other presbyters in that he was a direct witness to Christ's suffering. And he mentions this. I who am a fellow elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ. So he actually watched it. Most of them didn't. So the simple fact that he was present there watching the sufferings of Christ gives him a certain authority among the pastors. Rome wants to elevate Peter to the position of pope as if he was the supreme pastor among all pastors. But when Peter talks about himself, he does not elevate himself in that way. He just says, I'm a fellow pastor. That's it. He's one among many. What sets him apart is the fact that he witnessed the sufferings of Christ. And inasmuch as he partook of those sufferings, he would also partake in Christ's glory. You've seen this throughout Peter and in Romans when we looked at that the two are often linked. The suffering is often linked with glory. Inasmuch as we participate in suffering, we will participate in glory. There is never an ultimate glory end without first a time of suffering. And that's what we are in now. We should not look for glory in this life. The glory is yet to be revealed, as Peter says here, that will be revealed. All right, verse 2. Shepherd the flock of God, which is among you, serving as overseers, not by constraint, but willingly, and not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Shepherd the flock. The word pastor, you see on the handout, the word pastor is from the old French pasteur, meaning herdsman or shepherd. So the word pastor literally means shepherd. Shepherd the flock, pastor the flock. And it's a term that includes both care, to feed, to tend, to guard, to protect, so both care and protection. Shepherd the flock. Watch over them, keep them, protect them, feed them, which is among you, serving as overseers, not by constraint, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Here Peter now lays out what proper shepherding or pastoring looks like. This is how it works. First of all, serving as overseers. So oversight. A word episcopo, from which we get episcopus, another ecclesiastical term, a church term. To look upon, or more, to care for. So when it talks about serving as overseers, it's more serving as caretakers. So you see kind of the etymology of the word episcopo there, to look intently, focus on, looking with fitting concern, looking on that requires what that naturally leads to, that is care. So oversee, take care of. Not by constraint or compulsion, that is. Flat out force. Don't use force with the sheep. You can't force people to believe. Care, don't force. Not by constraint, but willingly. That is, bring people's will into it, voluntarily, of one's own accord, spontaneously. This is how people should be led, so that they see the need themselves and willingly engage it and come along, not being forced into things by fear. According to God, willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. Yeah, the according to God is in the Greek, but not in the English version. So there is an added thing, but willingly, according to God. Not for dishonest gain, but eagerly is what the Greek says. Not for gain. Literally for money, for filthy lucre's sake. You shouldn't be doing this for the money. And eagerly, a word meaning readily, of ready mind, cheerfully, with passion, thoroughly willing. So this is the shape of what Peter wants the pastoral ministry to be among God's people. A positive thing. Caring for people, leading them, trying to bring along their will, not just forcing people to believe in a certain way, not lording anything over them, which is a term he'll use next. Verse 3 rather, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. So not exercising lordship. That's all one word in the Greek, according to lordship, literally. In other words, being a master of people and demanding they do a certain thing. Yeah, and I've seen this numerous times. Sometimes I've seen this in guys that were in the military and then leave the military to become pastors. Not always. Some of those guys are great pastors. But some of them enter the pastoral ministry with an attitude of giving and taking orders like they did in the military, and they expect people just to snap to when they give an order. And I've watched them utterly destroy congregations doing that. It's not the way it works. It's a difficult line to walk, because there are things you need to be firm with, but always shaped by compassion and love, never just ever by fear. Although sometimes being compassionate and loving is saying this far and no further. And as an example, the Greek word there literally is type, as a type, being a type to the flock. A type of what? Well, a type pointing to Jesus. Now, the pastoral ministry is supposed to reflect the office of Christ. It is his office being carried out on earth. So, question, how might a pastor lord things over others, other than just a military option I mentioned? How might that happen? What's an example where somebody lording something over another? I'd prefer you didn't start that with, remember that time when you did that? Well, Yeah?
A pastor has the decision to give communion to the congregation, but if you feel they're not being a Christian, you have the power to say, I don't believe you should receive communion.
Right? Maybe to that person who was denied communion, it feels like you're lording something over him.
Right.
But, yeah, that's an example of compassion. You don't want to hurt their souls. You don't want them to do something to their harm. But, right, so the perception is complicates this lordship thing, because people will feel at times like you are lording it over them when in fact you're not.
But if a pastor doesn't listen to his flock, I mean, when a person comes to the pastor and says, what about this? And the person is right, and the pastor says, well, I'm the pastor, and therefore what I say goes.
Yeah.
That's lording it over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, guys that are micromanagers that have to run everything too, that won't let their laity use their talents and gifts in the church. You know, he's got to be everything, do everything. That's another example of it. Just dictating how things are going to be done rather than bringing people along.
Telling them stuff that is not, they don't have the authority to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it comes to the upkeep of the building, the pastor doesn't have authority
Right.
to tell the congregation what to do.
Right.
If the pastor says this is going to be done, that's lording it over.
Yeah, I remember my dad once being in charge of some Lutheran layman's thing where he had to organize a meal, which he did, and he was very good at that sort of thing. The pastor decided he wanted to do it, so he just did it right over the top of everything Dad did. Expected Dad to step down and let his stuff all go. You know, that burned up my dad pretty good, rightfully so. That's, overstepping your bounds. Here's Luther's take. I've got a few quotes here from Luther I thought were good. So, the first, a servant of God should be a wise and faithful servant. If he does not pay attention to the former qualification, wisdom, he will become a mere spectator and slothful and unworthy of such honor. Thus, in those people who in foolish humility try to get along with everybody everywhere and to be popular with their charges, the influence of authority is necessarily lost, and familiarity breeds contempt. How gravely do they sin? They allow things that belong to God and have been entrusted to them to be trampled underfoot. They should have seen to it that these things were honored. On the other hand, if he does not pay attention to the latter qualification, faithfulness, he will become a tyrant who always frightens people with his power. He wants to be considered grim. Instead of striving to make their authority as fruitful as possible for others, such people try and make it as frightful as possible, even though, according to the apostle, that power was given not to destroy but to edify. But let us call these two faults by name, softness and hardness. These are the two main faults from which all the mistakes of pastors come. No wonder, for softness is rooted in evil desires, and hardness is uncontrolled wrath. These two faults are responsible for everything that's evil, as everybody knows. Therefore, it is difficult to accept an office unless these two beasts are first slain. Yeah, one of the reasons why, I'm not a fan of calling your pastor by his first name is this familiarity thing. There is a place where there's a certain respect that's healthy to the office. Not the person. Not that I'm worthy of any respect, but the office itself is. And that, it's one of the ways we recognize that is not by being too familiar with the office. Second box there. A preacher must be a fighter and a shepherd. He must have teeth in his mouth. Teaching is a very difficult art. Paul contends, as does Peter, that sound doctrine must be urged and those who contradict must be answered. Men who hold the office of the ministry should have the heart of a mother toward the church, for they have no such For if they have no such heart, they soon become lazy and disgusted, and suffering in particular will find them unwilling. Thus your heart toward the sheep is like that of a mother toward her children, a mother who walks through fire to save her children. You will not be a fit preacher. Did I miss something there? Unless your heart, toward your sheep is that of a mother. You will not be a fit preacher. Labor, work, unthankfulness, hatred, envy, and all kinds of sufferings will meet you in this office. If then the mother heart, the great love, is not there to drive the preachers, the sheep will be poorly served. So that speaks well to how Peter describes the office of the ministry here, as he would have it conducted too. Any thoughts? All right. Okay, then verse 4. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of glory that does not fade away. There is a linking Jesus to this office, the same terminology. Christ is now the chief shepherd, the chief pastor. It shows the pastoral ministry is in fact his office. And all human beings here do is just, seek to continue the work of law and gospel, forgiving sins that he started. And it further shows the methods ascribed to the ministry are his methods. Preaching, teaching, administering the sacraments. This is the pastor's main calling. These are Christ's tools. Asterisks at the bottom of the page, it is only when the chief shepherd returns that glory will be revealed. So when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory. The pre-described methods are not glorious and in fact look quite weak and ineffective.
It's interesting to note that in verse 1, he says, also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. And in verse 4, then he says, you'll receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. So when Jesus returns, you'll receive it. So he is saying he's already a partaker, but yet it's not yet come.
Mm-hmm. Given but not yet realized. Yeah, right. Okay, verse 5. Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now, some have argued for a contradiction in this verse. They claim that while Peter talks about the younger submitting to elders, he then contradicts himself by saying everyone should submit to everyone else. They then claim that the latter half of the verse trumps the first half, that everyone should submit to everyone else. Therefore, the idea of submission to rulers or to husbands is null and void. Yeah, I've actually read that argument, particularly by feminists, trying to justify rejecting the idea of submitting to husbands. They claim that, well, that doesn't apply because Peter says we should be submitting to everybody. Everybody submit to everybody. So husbands ought to be submitting to wives too. So how do you answer that? Well, as the first asterisk says, first rule of interpretation is context determines meaning. Is the context here one encouraging egalitarianism and complete equality in all things, or does the context speak of a kind of rank or office and submission to it? Well, Peter just got done talking about the pastoral office. He painted it in terms of care and yet firmness. And it is clear that this being the office of Christ, there's a certain respect to be afforded it and a submission to the word being taught by it. Peter, throughout 1 Peter, he talks about people submitting to others according to what station you're in. Parents or children should submit to parents. we should submit to government. So throughout Peter, it's been a constant list of this group should be submitting to that group because that's how we show honor to God. So to suddenly come along and claim that when Peter says everybody submit to everybody else, he's talking about there's no more lines and everybody is in submission to everybody else is nonsense. What he's saying there is, according to your rank, you should be submitting to whoever is over you, whether that be government, whether that be pastors, whether that be parents. Everybody has an office they occupy, and every office has somebody else over that you submit to. So everybody should submit to those under whom they serve. That's what he's saying here. Not everybody submit to everybody else because somehow or another we're all utterly equal in all things. So regardless of what position or office you occupy in this world, there will be someone to submit to and to be humble to. So God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble.
Could Peter also be talking here, if you look at what Christ did, he basically submitted himself for the church.
Yes.
So like that, then
There-
the pastor is to submit for the congregation, not necessarily to have them lord over, but to do what he can for the congregation.
Yeah, even rank here, if one occupies an office that is due respect, does not mean that respect is all one way. Because the one occupying that office will lower himself to show compassion and love to those under him, too. In that way, submit. Absolutely right. And we have the example, too, of Moses in the Old Testament, who, presumably among the Israelites, held the highest office in all Israel. He was God's singular prophet during this time. He spoke to God face to face. And yet, in Numbers 12, as I have on the last asterisk there, in Numbers 12, it says Moses was the most human man most humble man on the planet. So even though his office was the ultimate office, his person was also the ultimate in humility. The higher the office, the greater the humility is the way it should be. Unfortunately, not so in the way the secular world works. But this is true even of God. What higher office is there than God himself? And who humbled himself the most other than Christ? So the higher the office, the greater the humility. And that's what should be honored and submitted to by those under it. All right, verse 6 and 7. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Cast all your care on him, for he cares for you. So the humility and the submission we are to show to those in our world is actually a humility and a submission to God himself. We humble ourselves under God as we are likewise humbling ourselves under other people. Cast all your care upon him. So this defines humility, casting one's care. As one commentator put it, casting one's fractured self upon God, yielding to his mercy, trusting wholly in him. The word care in English, in the Greek, literally means anxiety, worry. So cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Be sober, sober-minded, that is a word meaning not intoxicated, refers to having presence of mind, clear judgment, enabling someone to be temperate, self-controlled, uninfluenced by intoxicants, to have one's wits about them, which is the opposite of being irrational. So focus on this, be smart about this thing, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion seeking someone who's may devour. So the second asterisk under that verse on the handout, this verse 2 has been attacked by biblical critics, claiming the author didn't know anything about lions because lions don't roar before they attack. If they did, they would scare their prey away. So what kind of meathead would write a thing like this? Because that's just not the way it really works. Lions don't walk around roaring. Peter obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. So how do we answer that? Well, what's the context? Context determines meaning. What's he trying to say here? Devil walks around like a roaring lion. If you were camping out and you heard something like a roar when you're in the middle of the woods, how would that affect you? It'd scare the liver out of you. You know, supposedly we've got a cougar running around just north of town here that many people have seen. So, you know, you're out in the woods doing your thing in the woods, and you hear a cougar growl at you and roar at you. Man, turn around. Of course, you turn around and run, and that's exactly what you shouldn't do. But it's absolutely scare the liver out of you. And I think that's the point of comparison here. The devil walks around like a roaring lion. He walks around causing fear. That's his tool. Looking for somebody that he may devour. He's devouring people with fear. This is the point of comparison. The devil is a fearful beast. So, again, Peter isn't talking about how they attack. He's talking about using a lion as a point of comparison with fear, which is particularly meaningful in our day, you know, because fear is what's driving everything around us in the world. It is the devil's tool. Make people afraid, you can drive them into all kinds of conflicts with each other. Fear-mongering is a great tool to divide people. Verse 9, resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. So fear is a universal weapon that he uses throughout the world. And the proper Christian response to this fear attack is to resist. Don't give in to it. Resist him. Don't let fear guide you. Be steadfast in the faith. Faith undoes fear. We have a God who loves us and holds us in his hands. We have nothing to fear about anything, not even death. And we are not alone either. The same thing is happening to Christians all over the world. All right. Any thoughts? Any comments? We'll stop there, even though it's early. I think I got to rest my voice. Anything? All right, we'll wrap it up a little early then today. Let's close. Merciful Father, we do thank you for protecting us from the evil one, and we thank you for blessing us in your church. Be with us this day. Feed us on your word of grace. Strengthen us by it, and help us live in this evil place, confessing you as we ought. For Jesus' sake, amen.